My name is Randy Lindsay. I'm the author of The Milkman's Son. A DNA test meant to help me with my family history work revealed that my dad wasn't my biological father. I've shared my experiences with others who then told me their DNA stories. From heartwarming to shocking and all the secrets in between, this show was a collection of stories others have shared with me. Do you have a DNA secret? Welcome to My DNA Secret, where we discuss charming, funny, and sometimes shocking surprises discovered through DNA. My name is Randy Lindsay, and with me here today is Terry Bradford. Good morning, Terry.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Randy.
So, you have an interesting story, and I think it starts with the fact that you don't have a father listed on your birth certificate.
Right. Well, I am the oldest of 5 children, and all my life I kind of wondered who my father was. I knew that my mother had been married, she eventually was married 5 times, and I knew none of them were my father, and I would somewhat question it within my own mind, but I never really asked my mother very much about this until I grew up and eventually joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay.
And about a year later, I decided I would serve a mission, and I needed a passport because I get called to go to England. And so I went down to the county offices to find a passport, and they couldn't find one. I told them that what my name was. They were able to find some records enough to identify me by my birth date and the first name Terry. But they finally came up with a birth certificate with the last name of Allen, which is my mother's maiden name.
Okay.
And then also it says father not publicized. And I remember I was with my best friend who was also going to be serving a mission. I was a little embarrassed because I thought it would reveal something, and it actually revealed that this was supposed to be a big secret.
Yeah. We love secrets on this show.
Right. So my mother, I needed to ask her a little bit more about this, because one of the problems that I wanted is my stepfather, or whatever, his name last name was Bradford, and I'd been going by that name since I was about 13, and I wanted the passport to be in Bradford. So I had a dilemma, and so I asked my mother, well, first of all, who was my father? And she told me, well, this guy that she had dated in high school, she eventually married, but then had the marriage annulled a couple of months later because she was only 16, he was only 17. She said his name was Tex, and his last name was Harrell. And I said, well, who is he? She says, well, you met him one time. I think he borrowed a tie from me, but I don't recall any of this. And in my family, there were 5 children. 4 of us had different fathers because she'd married or been with other people quite a bit. So this is, again, continued to be a little bit of an embarrassment. I was able to go through an attorney and get the name changed so that I could get my passport in Bradford, but I still had this lingering question who my father was. I even went down to the Campbell, California high school library to see if I could look up some pictures of people that fit the name of Tex Harrell, and I couldn't find anybody in that. So I just kind of dropped it. I was a little bit embarrassed about it.
So why did your mother choose not to put a name on it?
Yeah, the reason, I asked her about that. I said, how come it says father not publicized? She says, she told me the story about how she had been married. They got the marriage annulled after a couple of months, but she continued to see him physically. And so when I was conceived, they wanted to keep it a secret, and the reason is she wanted to keep me as her child. But his mother, Tex Harrell's mother, was very forceful, and a very strong woman, and she said they were sure that she would want to take me away from my mother and raise me herself. So that's why they put not publicized. She did not know about me at all. She may have known that my mother was pregnant, but she didn't put 2 and 2 together at all.
So part of a plot against the mother-in-law kind of thing, right?
Yes.
Wow.
I did get to meet her years and years later, and it was confirmed she was a very strong, opinionated woman, and I think that probably would have happened.
Okay. All right, and then what happened next?
So I went ahead and served my mission, got the passport squared away. But when I came home, I eventually got married, and then in our ward, they were putting a big push on having a 4-generation
So
chart.
for audience members who don't know what a ward is, that's a congregation,
Right.
right? Okay.
The congregation that I attended in San Jose, California, they said, we'd like everybody to do a 4-generation family history sheet. Well, I had one side I could go on my mom's, but I really didn't have anything much on my father's. And I remember not turning it in because I was just embarrassed about the whole thing. And I thought, well, could I go through the Bradford, which is my stepfather? Do I go through this Harrell, Tex Harrell, that I really never met? I don't know much about him at all. So I remember just not turning the thing in, being quite embarrassed about that. One day, though, my grandfather came over on my mother's side, my mother's father, and my wife said to him, she says, Terry's really interested in finding out who his father is. And he said, you know what, I think I know where he is. In fact, he doesn't live very far from here. I'll contact him and see what you think. So one day I'm at work, and now I'm in my 30s, and my wife calls up and says, I think I just met your father.
Really?
And my first question was, because I'm short, I said, how tall is he? And she says, well, he's about 6 foot. And I'm going, boy, I sure got shortchanged there.
Because you know what, I just really can't imagine a guy named Tex being kind of on the short side. That would be
exactly
interesting.
He was from Texas, and that's why they call him Tex, but yeah, you wouldn't imagine him being short. So anyway, she had arranged for me to meet him the next day. And so I went over to his house, introduced myself. He says, yeah, I know who you are. And we sat around a table, and he says, yeah, I'm your father. I asked him specifically, my mother says, you're my father, are you? He says, yes, I am. I was there when you were born, but he told me the same story. Didn't want my mom to know because of what she would have, the problems she would have caused.
Goodness. Yeah.
And so we had, I would visit him every once in a while. He only lived about 3 streets away from me. He was a very nice man. His wife died, and eventually he moved back to Texas. And so we kept a phone conversation going. He eventually died of cancer, but when he was having a surgery, I went down to Houston to MD Anderson and visited him before his surgery, and thought that this was my father, and went from there. He also had 3 daughters, and I was able to meet 2 of those daughters. One of them contacted me several years later, quite a few years later actually, and said, Terry, she says, I'm trying to do some health history. Would you be willing to take a DNA test through 23andMe? It was quite expensive, but she says, but 23andMe gives health information. Since you have an X and a Y chromosome, it'll help me determine what my health would be perhaps in the future. I said, sure, I'll be more than happy to do that. So after we took this test, we were excited to see the results, and she said, I remember we were texting back and forth, and she said, I'm devastated. She says, we're not related at all.
What?
Yeah, we're not related at all.
So you go through all this, no father name on the birth certificate,
Right.
and the hide from the mother-in-law, and it turns out that you're not even related.
We're not even related. So yeah, so I'm devastated too. So I immediately called up my mother and I said, Mom, this guy that you've been telling me for, at this point it was about 60 years, it was my father. It says, it's not my father. Who could it be? And she says, oh, well, it's got to be this guy named Rick.
Right.
And I go, well, now who's Rick? And she says, well, after she got her annulment, probably about December of 1951, she and a friend went up from Campbell, California to Richmond, California to visit her friend's cousin. And during that weekend, she met this guy named Rick.
Okay.
She says that Rick worked at a butcher shop, but he was about 5 years older than her, so she says, so it didn't work out. She says, but he was good looking. I think he was Italian. That's what she says. So I said, okay, do you know his last name? No, just Rick. And I go, so my mother was born in 1935, so that means he was probably born in 1930. His name was Rick. He worked at a butcher shop and lived in Richmond, California. And so that's what I had to go on.
And that should be so easy to track down off of that information, right?
Well, wanting to, now having some better information than I've been told in my life, I decided I would do a little research. And so I went and through, I also had taken a test through Ancestry.com. And one of the things I was finding out on both of these tests is that my father's lineage was Hispanic, and that most of them had come from northern New Mexico or southern Colorado. So anyway, I decided that I would, through Ancestry, you can have access to yearbooks. And so I went up through all the Richmond High yearbooks to see if I could find a Rick, a Richard, or Enrique, Ricardo, anything like that, that somebody that looked like my father. And so I would look at all these pictures, and none of them really matched up. There was one that I thought.
And that had to be a grueling process, right? I mean, you're just picture after picture after picture.
It was quite frustrating. There was one that I kind of honed in on, and I thought, I wonder if this could have been it. And I did some research on him, found out that he had died, but his widow was still alive. And I actually got her phone number, and I called her, and I said, listen, I'm looking for my father. It may be that your late husband was related to me. Can you tell me something about him? And things started to add up a little bit. He was born in 1930. I asked her, had he ever been a butcher? She goes, oh yeah, he did everything. He was a butcher. So I'm thinking this might be the guy. But he didn't look like me at all.
Okay.
Now I wasn't going to tell his widow that, I think he might be my father, because the timeline was he was married when I would have been conceived. So I'm thinking, I'm not going to destroy this, even if it is true. But it just never felt right. And, being a religious person, I would pray. I thought this was very important, but, that I felt that there were people on the other side of the veil that wanted to be found, that their names needed to be known, that they needed to be remembered, and that they were pulling for me on this side on earth to find this information out. So I was very discouraged.
So ancestors who passed away wanting the work done in the present day.
Yeah, I really felt that they needed me to find out who they were.
Okay.
So I would check on Ancestry and 23andMe occasionally to see if I had some close relatives. The closest I could get was a third to fifth cousin. I would email some of these people and say, do you know Rick, who was a butcher in Richmond, California, born in 1930? And I got a few responses, and none of them knew who I was talking about.
Right, and for those who are not familiar with the process, a third to fifth cousin, wow, that can be so distant from where you are that they may have never heard of anyone in your family.
Right.
Because, that's how far a third through fifth cousin is.
Right, and most of these people were in the New Mexico region. What I came to find out later, when I did find who my father was, that he at an early age had moved to California, and so that's why he was kind of a distance factor in there to where they may not have known who he was, even if they could recall, because he wasn't in that area anymore. So I just kind of gave up a little bit. I would check with Ancestry and 23andMe every once in a while. I would email somebody. I was getting nowhere and was getting discouraged. And again, when you do a family history chart, you can do it in several ways, but I had this fan chart. And one half of the fan chart had a lot of names. That was on my mother's side, but the other half was completely blank. So I would pray that somebody would take the test that was a little closer than a third or fifth cousin. My wife and I started preparing to serve a mission, and we got called to the Manhattan, New York temple. And my wife says, there are blessings that come from serving the Lord. She says, I bet while we're there, you're going to find out who your father was.
Okay.
So I went ahead and we went, had a great time, but I would continue to pray all the time that somebody would take this test. Well, in March of 2019, this year, I checked Ancestry, and all of a sudden this name popped up. And its name was Linda Bullock, who lived in Lacey, Washington. It says that she has enough DNA to be your first cousin or your half-sister. And I go, bingo. So she had taken the test, and also her two children had taken the test. So going on social media, I went to Facebook to see if I could find a Linda Bullock who was friends with Ananda Bullock and Patrick Bullock, who were her children, and I found this one, Linda Bullock, that seems to be the right person. So I got on Messenger, and I messaged her, and I said, Linda, says, Ancestry.com says that we may be first cousins. I didn't want to say the half-sister part. but I said, we may be first cousins. Can you tell me something about your father's side? So she immediately messaged me back. Thank goodness she was good on social media and could get this. She immediately messaged me back and says, yes. She says, my father's name was Lee Richard Romero. He was born in Denver, Colorado, but spent most of his youth in teenage years in Richmond, California. He was born July 13th of 1930.
Okay.
And by the way, he's still alive. And so I immediately messaged her back and I said, Linda, I said, let me tell you my story. My mother says my father's name is Rick. He was born probably in 1930. She met him in Richmond, California, and he worked at a butcher shop. I said, I don't mean to be presumptuous, but do you think that this Rick could be my father and you could be my sister? And she messaged back, she says, oh wow, I think so. And she was in shock.
Yeah.
Because she had no idea. He had no idea.
Oh, I know how that feels. I mean, so I've got a memoir out about that exact situation. A sister contacting me and saying, "Hey, I think you're my brother."
Yeah.
You know, and I thought, yeah, you're crazy. You're a crazy lady to think that you're my sister. But she really isn't crazy, and she's very lovely and nice, and I'm really glad that I'm related to her. But yeah, what an incredible shock for everybody, right?
And one of the great things is she has a sister, Lori, but Linda was the right one to tap into this because Linda immediately started sending me, well, these are our grandparents. She had dates, birth dates, she had death dates, she had pictures of them. These are our great-grandparents. She had birth dates, she had death dates, she had pictures of them. She had a whole box full of family history things, which, you know, if I had contacted the other sister, she might not have had that. But Linda had all of that. Linda told me that she was going to go and visit her father in the end of April 2019 and stay there probably for a month. And I said, you know, this is an opportunity I can't pass up. I said, Linda, would there be a chance that, or do you think it would be a good thing for myself to come and meet him? She says that would be probably fabulous, but I need to work on him a little bit.
Right.
So she started to contact him and told him that, hey, I've been having all of these, I took a DNA test, I'm having all of these relatives, some of them close contacting me, it's so fun. I had Patrick and Ananda, her children, do it, says, this is so great. And she says, in fact, one of them looks like he could be your son. That was the first way and he said, well, I don't have a son. I said, oh, I know, but this guy looks like he could be your son. In fact, she said, we started doing messaging, video messaging, and she says, this is like I'm talking to my father.
Oh,
that's what she said. So anyway, she tried to break the news, tried to tell him a little bit of the story. He wasn't quite buying it. He doesn't understand this. He's 89, so comprehension sometimes is a little hard.
Well, right, and that's a whole lifetime of your world is this family, and you know this, right? And then at 89, to have someone come up and go like, oh, by the way, you have another son.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine being in that position and someone coming up and telling me that. That would just be so world-changing and shocking. Yeah, absolutely.
So I got permission from our temple president from Salt Lake and from Salt Lake City to go ahead with my wife to leave our mission for a long weekend and go and visit him. So we bought some tickets for about a month ahead, the month from then to go. But what we decided that we probably needed to do before we showed up is have him take a DNA test. It was kind of close because it takes about 3 weeks to get DNA results back.
Or more.
Or more sometimes. The earliest is like 3 weeks. And so she arranged for him to have a DNA test. Because then, if it proved out that he was my father, then it would be proof to be able to show him. So he was more than happy to do it. She had some friends. He lives in Twain Harte, California, which is near Sonora, California. So it's a little bit of long distance from her. But she had some friends there that administered the test to him, and then the results were sent to her. Well, about 3 days before we flew in, she got the DNA results, and it says, yes, he's my father. And so she then goes there and awaits us. She tells him a little bit more about this. He's just not buying it. I think he might have been a little bit embarrassed that, something about his youth was revealed, that maybe he wasn't as virtuous as perhaps he had led himself on to be, but things happen. Anyway, when my children who were in Arizona found out about this, says, Dad, we want to go, we want to be there when this happens too. So they arranged to fly up. But Linda and I both decided that this might be too much of a shock for my 4 children and Barbara and myself, my wife, to come in. There's 6 people that he doesn't know. She says, how about if you and Barbara come, and then maybe an hour later your children come? He said, that'll work out fine. So we flew into San Jose, California, drove up to Twain Harte, and my sisters were there, and they greeted us at the door, and I came in and met him, and we went back to a table and sat down, and he says, now, how are you related to the Romero family? So I told him the story, just like I'm telling you, and at the end I said, so DNA says that you're my father? I says, I haven't come here for anything other than to thank you for this beautiful life that I have. I have had a wonderful life. The Lord has blessed me so much. I have a beautiful wife and family, and I have faith, and so thank you very much for that. Well, he was a little bit cold, a little bit standoffish during this. Not rude or anything like that, but he was a little standoffish. When my children came about an hour later, though, his whole countenance changed. He knew that this was a legitimate thing. He told me later what he thought it was somebody trying to scam him, how seniors are taking advantage of it. Here's some long lost relative or son comes, and I'm trying to stake out what he has and take it away from him.
Right, but the grandchildren were the clincher, right?
Yeah, they were the clincher. There was a feeling there, and he knew, okay, this is legitimate. Nobody's going to go through this much to have to scam somebody. And then he was extremely friendly. He took me in a back room and showed me pictures and told me more about his story, and we had a wonderful visit. I invited everybody to go to a Mexican restaurant for us to have dinner. So we went to have dinner, and at the end of it, and he rode with me and my wife, and he said, you know what, his wife had died about 1.5 years earlier. He says, can we go visit her grave? And I said, sure, that would be great. So we all drove over to the gravesite, saw her headstone and his right next to it, of course, with no death date. And then he kind of just bore his testimony of faith and of God and Jesus Christ, and how if we all live faithful, we'll all be together. And he was thankful for his new family that he had met. But he wanted to tell my children and ourselves that he had faith in God, and that this was something that he looked forward to. Well, my children went home, and my wife and I went back the next day. And the next day he referred to me as his son. He had a flip phone, and he says, do you know how to use this? I said, yes. He said, can you put your number in there on my speed dial? Because I don't remember numbers. I said, sure. So I put my number in there on his speed dial. It's number 11. And so he called me. We visited him with him. That was after we went to church. We visited with him that afternoon. And on Sunday, we left. On Monday, he called me from his speed dial. Just wanted to make sure it worked, and called me his son again. And we've talked several times on the phone. Hopefully, and I talked to my sister Linda about this just a couple days ago, they're planning on coming out in March to meet the rest of my family, his family. We presented him with a picture of our family. We have 4 children and 13 grandchildren, and he was very appreciative of that.
And were you present when you,
Yeah, we brought it with him. In fact, my kids also brought pictures of their children's, a little bit bigger ones, and their family.
And so
we could.
How did he react? What was his, did he brighten up or what?
He did brighten up. And he again thanked us for this new family that he had no idea existed, and so it's really been nice. Now with my sister Linda and the other sister Lori, Linda especially, I've been keeping conversations going with, and we're planning some things like this trip. I've been able to take some of those names and put them into Family Search, and build my fan chart is now starting to fill up. Of course, some of them were ready for temple ordinances, and so we were able to do those. Especially what's nice about in the Manhattan Temple, it's a smaller temple, and we have a lot of free time in the afternoon, so we could do our own ordinances, which is really nice, which was very important to me. And hopefully they're being blessed on the other side.
Okay.
But that's kind of my story. To me, it's a story through trials and hardship and not knowing who you are, it kind of puts some doubts. You don't feel complete as a person a little bit because you don't know who your parents are. You know, I knew who my mother was, and I knew that side of the family, but there was always something lacking in me, not knowing who the other side was. And then you have these feelings that I do have relatives that are praying for me, wanting me to find them so that they can be identified and remembered. And so it's opened up a whole new avenue of that section of my life that was blank before.
Nice.
And now it's getting filled up.
Nice. Okay, so as we wrap up, is there anything about this journey, one last comment you want to make, or do you think you covered it all?
Well, it's just it's a journey of faith as well, because for whatever reason, the Lord did not want to reveal this to me right away, and I'm not sure why. I felt that my life has been orchestrated by Him in many ways, and that things have happened for a reason. And so some of the things I've had to find out, or had to wait upon, or endure, or whatever, were for my own good. And maybe if I had learned all this stuff a long time ago in my 30s, I wouldn't have done anything with it. But now in this stage of my life, when it's very important to me to know who my ancestors are, I think He waited till that time so I would appreciate and do something with it.
Oh, that was an amazing story. Thank you, Terry. Okay, so that's it for today. That's Terry Bradford's story. And until next time, what secrets is your DNA holding?